Welcome to the Franciscan Spirituality Center in La Crosse, Wisconsin's What is Spirituality podcast. Your host, Steve Spildy, is the Associate Director at the Center. His guests talk about their evolving understanding of God, prayer, healing, and wholeness.
My name is Steve Spildy, and today I'm meeting with Barb Kruse. Welcome, Barb.
Thanks, Steve. It's good to be here.
And we've known each other for about 5 years.
Yep.
And we met before when we were part of the Spiritual Direction Preparation Program. And that is a program of the Franciscan Spirituality Center. And you were on the staff long before I joined the staff of the FSC. So could you tell me when you joined the staff of the center and kind of what brought you here?
Sure. So I knew about the center and have been part of the Spirituality Center long before I started working on staff. And probably, I think I began coming to the center maybe in the 90s and looking for spiritual direction. I remember coming to an Enneagram program. I was connected with the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration, the FSPA, through my husband Joe's work at the hospital. So we were connected to the sisters in that way because the sisters were sponsors of Franciscan or St. Francis at that time. So I knew a lot of the sisters. I knew about the center and just felt the draw to come here. So I would guess that was probably through the 90s that I started coming to the center, again for programs and then also spiritual direction. And then with that came an invitation to think about and consider the Spiritual Direction Preparation Program. And I listened to that invitation, and it felt right for me. And so I started the program, I think it was like in, 1999 maybe, and then finished the program in 2001 or 2002, somewhere in there. Those were the dates that I was part of the program. So then that connected me to the center in even a greater way. But I did not come to work at the Spirituality Center probably until about 2000 and maybe 2007 or 2008. And I came on as to work on a venture grant that the center had received from the Franciscan Sisters from the FSPA to have a Franciscan Fest. And so we created this festival, and I was part of that planning, and I did that. And then what surfaced from that experience was a part-time position on staff and spiritual direction, and eventually leading into being director of the Spiritual Direction Preparation Program and being here for 10 years. Half of that time knowing you, Steve.
You bet.
So it was great. So that's a long version of a long story.
No, it's all good. So you mentioned coming for spiritual direction and being involved in providing spiritual direction. Mm-hmm. For people who are new to that, how would you describe spiritual direction? What is that?
There's so many definitions of spiritual direction. Probably the one that would come to mind, first and foremost, would be spiritual direction is an opportunity to sit in a sacred setting with another person who will listen deeply, compassionately, non-judgmentally to your deeper story. To the, we hear a lot about each other's stories throughout our days. There's a lot of our story that we keep hidden. And that deeper story is a story that when we do share it in a spiritual direction setting, it opens us up to tapping into our truer and authentic self, which I believe is our God self and our spirit self. And with that ability and opportunity to do that, we find, at least I found, that I become more connected. This flow of love of what I would call God, other religions would call it something different, that is always calling me more deeply into love and compassion for myself and for the world around me. So spiritual direction can offer that place to understand our belovedness and free us from the wounds of our deeper story and help us be more connected to all of creation, which we already are. We just don't really get it most of the time. So,
Do you remember the first time you went to spiritual direction?
I do. Well, more. I mean, the first few visits, sure I do. Yeah.
Who was your spiritual director?
Oh, Sister Mary Catherine.
Okay.
She was great. Yeah, it was great. And, the best part about it, and I don't know, it took maybe a couple visits, but really to have somebody listen who really cared and I felt that they weren't waiting for their opportunity to speak about their story. Because I'm a listener, so I'm always waiting for the other person to share, and then my story stops, and then I receive what they have to say. But she was there just fully listening to me, so I felt really heard. And I also didn't take very long for her to help me see the connection between my story and God's story and how my story fits into that beautiful story of love, that I'm okay just as I am, even with my baggage and even with my brokenness. I'm fully loved, and that was the most freeing thing for me, to have somebody tell me what I intuitively knew, which I think we all know, but it's locked away.
Is that what you expected you would get from her?
No, I didn't know what I was going to get. No, it just felt, I was just at a point in a time in my life, probably in my late 40s, mid-40s, and raising kids, life was full, crazy, good. It was so good. But inside I felt a unsettledness and a restlessness and even a simmering anger that I just couldn't quite put my finger on. And I don't know, I think, again, I'm all about paying attention to the invitations. So somewhere along the line I heard a conversation between people or a comment, or I read something that just invited me to consider spiritual direction as a place to go and maybe to look a little more deeply into my story.
So you met with her one-on-one for spiritual direction.
Yep.
For how long?
Mm-hmm. Well, on and off several years, I'm sure. The piece that sometimes happens in spiritual direction, but not always. Mary Catherine being the really astute and attentive spiritual director, she has listened to my story for a couple sessions and then said that it might be a good idea for me to see somebody professionally to unwrap this story a little bit more. So, of course, I was like, you mean go to a therapist? And which felt real scary. But I think I was brave enough to know that it was the right thing to step into. And again, it was the right thing. So I kept seeing Mary Catherine for spiritual direction. Went to see Mary Wente was the therapist that I saw, and I probably saw her 4 or 5 times. And I just had a deeper story I needed to tell. And I told that story, and she listened, and there was a healing that happened in just telling the story. So,
how is therapy different from spiritual direction? How is what you got with Mary different from Sister Mary Catherine?
Yeah, I think, when you go to therapy, there is always a little more outcome focused when you go to therapy, that as a therapist, a therapist would feel that responsibility to move the person, maybe from point A to point B. Oftentimes not considering the spirituality that underlies the whole story. So I think Mary was able to take my particular story and experience in my life and offer me some tools and some insights that helped me understand the story a little bit more. And again, a lot of it's just giving permission, you're okay. This wasn't your fault. This is what happens. So that was really a freeing and healing thing for me. But that wasn't the spiritual piece woven through that. Some therapists will do that, but typically that doesn't happen. So in spiritual direction, it's not about getting a person to a specific place, because as a spiritual companion or a spiritual director, I will just continue to listen to the story, invite the directee more deeply into their story by asking them feeling, question, longings, but where's God in the midst of this for you? What do you feel you're being invited to? A little more deeply, the directee can explore their particular experience or story in the context of what God's invitation is for them in that.
You mentioned when you started seeing Mary Catherine, you were busy as a mom, and you've got 4 sons?
Mm-hmm. I do.
So that's your current family. And then the family you were born into, how big was your family? Where did you fit in?
Yeah,
birth or that sort of?
Family of origin. There were 6 of us kids, and I was the 4th. And the way the family happened, there was 4 of us older kids, and then this period of no kids, and then 2 more kids a little bit later on. So I'm the youngest of the first 4, and then there's 9 years between myself and my sister, and then 3 years between her and my brother Tom. So I have 3 older brothers and me, and then my sister Marianne, and then my brother Tom. So even though I was 4th born, I was the first girl.
And you were kind of like the youngest child when you grew up?
Until I was 9.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
My dad called me Fairy Wings. But I wasn't much of a Fairy Wings. I was a real tomboy. I had these 3 older brothers.
Yeah. So the family you grew up in, religious, not religious?
Yep. I grew up in a Catholic household. I was born in 1956, so my elementary school years were, during the 60s.
Went to parochial school?
In a parochial school, from 2nd grade to 6th grade in a parochial school, and then that was it in the town we lived in. So then we went to public school after that. So my mom was born and raised Catholic, and my dad was not. I think his family was Lutheran. I don't know if how much they would practice their faith, and then Dad converted to Catholicism, probably in order at that time to marry my mom. This would be back in the early 50s. Yeah. Which is once, I remember his family could not come. No, his brother, nobody could be in the wedding party from his family because they weren't Catholic. And I think his mom didn't even come to the wedding. She was just pretty disappointed about the whole thing. I've picked that up over the years, that was sort of, that's sort of a little bit of a sore spot. A sadness, probably a sadness. But anyway, so Dad was the best Catholic he could be. We went to church every Sunday, and he was one of the first guys in the church who was asked to be an extraordinary communion distributor. This was after Vatican II, so then they were starting to let lay people get involved a little bit. And they asked my dad, and I think it was a really huge honor to be asked, but he was almost overwhelmed with that request, and he did it, and they had to wear cassocks and everything. And I remember he was always up there. He was just shaking the whole time he handed the host out, but he did it. I just really was always impressed by that. He stepped up to do that in a church that really didn't treat him so well early on. So, yeah.
So what was your experience growing up in the church? What was it, how attached were you? How much a part of your life was that? How important was that to you?
Yeah, it was pretty important. It was a pretty big part of our life because I went to the Catholic school and we lived close. So, I would go up there even in late summer and help the sisters. School Sisters of Notre Dame, a lot of them were our teachers, help them get ready for school, dust off the books and clean. And so it was a big part of that. My mom was probably involved in some of the women's committees. I know at some point she sang in the choir. My brothers were all altar boys.
Were the sisters still in habits when you were in school?
Sisters were still in habits when I was school, yeah. Actually, one little story is when I was 6, we built my parents built a home close to it was a new church and school that had just been built. And so we built a home. And we had moved into this home, and at some point, my parents wanted the sisters to come down. They wanted to come and see the house. And you could see the school was a little bit in church in the where they lived. We're up on top of the hill, just a little ways away. But they couldn't come in the house because they weren't allowed in people's homes at that time. So this was probably the early 60s. And so I remember sitting on the doghouse in our backyard, looking up at the hill and watching these 4 women walking abreast, each coming down the hill in full black habit at dusk. So my mom would turn all the lights on inside the house so they could walk around the house and see inside. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. But anyway, there was that connection. I mean, of course, we never had them over for dinner at that point because they couldn't come. But later on, I think things started changing, and then we did have some of the sisters over. Everything started changing. Yeah. So that was pretty pivotal for me because, all of a sudden we started having a guitar mass, and Sister Clarice Marie, who was our teacher, picked up the guitar, and then we sang all these, I think, Ray Rep songs. And I was just actually singing some of them the other day to my grandson because I remember them because we sang them so loud and so free.
So this was all Vatican II?
Post-Vatican II, just right after.
And how old were you about this time?
I must have been, if I was born in 56, I was probably 9, 10, and 11, right in that. So that was probably 4th, 5th, 6th grade. Okay. 12 maybe. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was big. I think more, I don't have the words for it. It's probably bigger, more intuitively and a little bit more, there's just more of a feel about it than there would be a head thing around it.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was your impression of God at this time? If someone had asked you, how would you have described God?
Yeah, I think at that time God was still, a guy, old, kind of the old man with the beard up in the sky. A little, that would probably be my first go-to because that was all the images that I saw, and and then that people who were religious were sort of right, kind of a tier up above everybody else, and then there was us people, who constantly needed to be better than we were. But I think I started thinking about things differently a little bit in 5th grade. It was either 5th or 6th grade. And this is such a clear memory for me. It was religion class, and we were talking, it must have been about heaven and hell. And I don't really know how the conversation went. But the question, I think, was, well, where is heaven and where is hell? And the answer came as clear as day to me. And you know how when you're a little in school and you raise your hand and everybody has their hands up and you really want to be called on and you're lifting and you're practically out of your seat and I had the answer. And she didn't call on me. And so then class, it ended. And then the day ended. And I thought, dang, I hope maybe we'll pick it up tomorrow. So I went to school with my answer the next day, and it never came up again. And so that was the first time I think I probably did any real theological reflection.
What was your answer?
So my answer at that time, my sixth grade answer was, well, heaven is in all things that are good, and hell are in things that aren't good. There was just this, but what was in that for me was that heaven and hell are here. We're living how we live our life. We choose, and that choices we make can affect that experience of I even hate to use heaven and hell. I don't even like those, but those experiences of life and those experiences of not life or separation, that feeling of just stepping away, or I don't know, there's other language to use, but so that was, I think about that. It's probably my first theological.
How do you think that
reflective
answer would have been received if you'd have gotten called on?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Actually, I think it probably would have been received because I felt really safe and comfortable putting it out there, and something in the conversation must have led me there. So the conversation and the dialogue must have been opening in some way. So that's sort of what I'm thinking.
Knowing you, my guess is your answer probably hasn't shifted that much over time.
Yeah, it's probably evolved a little bit, but no, I think there was a lot. There was a lot there that I have been able to unpack over the years to offer more clarity for me about what that was about. So thanks for asking that question, Steve. That's the first time I've been able to answer it. It's taken how many years?
So that was your middle school self or late elementary self.
Yeah, it was 5th or 6th grade because we had the same teacher for both of those years, and she was the teacher. So,
what was your experience of God and experience of church as you got older, as you got into high school?
Yeah. Oh, we had CCD classes, which were okay. Nothing. There's nothing stand out for me in middle school and high school so much.
And then you went to
with
college.
Religion. And then I went to college at College of St. Benedict, so all girls Catholic liberal arts school in Minnesota. And
was that because it was a Catholic school or just a good college? Was that higher in your priority?
I think it was more a good college, and that it was close, not real far from home, and I think one of my aunts had gone there. So, all I really cared about at that time was, I really wanted to play athletics. And, so this was after Title IX, which was, when was that now? I should know when all this was. That was in 72 or 73. Anyway, when I was in high school, so that would have been 72, 73, 74. The last few years of high school, I got in on interscholastic sports because they could start out programs for girls. Now they had to, and that was for me. That's when we talk about experiences of freedom, and that was huge for me to do that. And then so I chose a college that offered interscholastic sports, and my parents were supportive and seemed like the right fit. But really, spiritually, I don't really. The first couple of years, I was pretty lost soul, I think, in terms of who I was and what I was about. But then after I met Joe, I met my husband Joe when I was a junior, and he was a theology and philosophy major, and I loved that. So I loved talking about that stuff.
Did he ever think about priesthood, or
That's why he went to St. John's.
Oh, okay.
He was going to be a priest, yeah. And I also, the other thing about some of my other earlier classes, I loved the religion classes at St. Ben's. I only had a handful of them. I was a dietetics major, so I did a lot of sciences and a lot of some maths and a lot of biologies and chemistries. But I did get in had to take a few philosophy, theology courses, and I just, some of those, I don't remember Nietzsche and Rahner, and I don't know, some of those names that just really spoke to me. I like that. And then when I met Joe, I was able to be part of some of those bigger dialogues, and I really liked that too. But then he was involved in teaching CCD at a small town close to St. Cloud, where our schools were, and he was part of these, were they core retreats? Anyway, some retreats for the high school kids, and then I would help out on the retreats. So that was kind of life-changing, being part of this core retreat experience, which is, that's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, kind of walk the kids through that experience of death and resurrection of Christ, but also laying it on the death and resurrections of your own life. And that was just, for me, that was all new and really powerful experience. So I think that was sort of a shift for me of looking at God in even a greater way. Yeah. And considering God's action in my life. Yeah. More intimately involved, I guess.
And then you guys got married, and
Yeah, we got married.
life got busy.
Yeah, we got married, and then the next probably important religious experience for me was to be, after we got married, Joe was working as a youth minister in Hastings, Minnesota, and I was living in St. Paul, working as a dietitian at St. Paul Ramsey. And it was right before we got married, and then shortly after we were involved in some Lenten discussion groups. So it was a group of people, all older than us, who had kids, at varying stages of life. But these people were all at least 10 to 15 years older than we were. So we kind of got swooped up in this group, and our first book we read was Redemptive Intimacy. I'll never forget that book. Again, it was another dive into thinking about God in a more intimate way, in a different way. And so that was in 1979, and we are still really close friends with everybody in that group.
How would you, so during this time, your understanding of God, how is that shifting?
I think I'm seeing God as God, there's just an inner expansion. I mean, I use that a lot. I feel that a lot. But that God is bigger. That I think maybe there was this knowing that I have an active role to take in this whole relationship and this experience. And there's a lot of inviting going on.
But in this group, the community aspect is part of it too.
Yep.
Feeling it in the midst of the community.
Right, yeah. And community has always been a big part of our lives. Different communities that we've been able to connect to that have really, I think, offered a greater container to hold this God energy, and to hold this love. And I think when you kind of can be in a container like that with others, then you can respond and give back, in some really profound ways. Or profound's probably not the best word, but just some greater ways.
So between that time and when you started meeting with Sister Mary Catherine for spiritual direction, any shifts, any important moments in that time?
Yeah, I think just a gradual, continued unfolding. Richard Rohr talks about, that experiences of great love and great suffering as being just experiences that crack you open, to a deeper understanding of God's presence in our lives and acceptance. And I think having kids has been one of those great experiences. All the things that come with kids, because there's this unconditional love that's just all of a sudden there that you didn't even know could be there, and all of a sudden it's there. So if you step back and say, what's that about? And then that kind of love for another person that you've created or adopted, or all that love is there, and then to be able to step back and say, wow, that experience of love equals or doesn't even equal the love that God has for me and for the world. And to start just asking some of those questions or thinking about that a little bit more. So having kids for me in our experiences with children had just cracked that open in a new way, because it's just a lot of outpouring of love and the suffering that went with us. I mean, we didn't, we again went down the infertility road for lots of years, so not real long, because it was pretty easy for us to decide to adopt. And we adopted Ben, which was just a gift, and then again was able to. Then all of a sudden, I was able to be pregnant and have, a natural birth child. So that was beautiful, having both of those experiences and experiencing those ways of receiving life. And then some hard things too. I mean, I lost a baby. I was almost like 7 months pregnant, and then John was stillborn. And that was so sad, but it was so bittersweet too. There was so many sacred moments that came with that experience of that loss. I'm just trying to think of other little things that happen with kids that.
How old was the youngest about the time you started meeting with Mary Catherine?
Let's see, if I met with Mary Catherine. Mark was born in 91. So I probably started meeting with Mary Catherine. Maybe Mark was like 3 or 4, 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what were some of the early questions you brought to Mary Catherine that you were wrestling with?
I think that was the first question was just that I have this feeling in me, and it's restlessness and sometimes short patience and maybe some simmering anger, and I'm not quite sure what that's about. That's probably the first thing. I don't know that I went to her with any specific God questions, but it was just my life story. And, God's right in the middle of it, so.
We're both familiar with the Enneagram, and for people who don't know what that's about, the 9 types, personality types. Both of us are the same style, number 9, which really struggles with our anger.
Yeah.
Was that a big part of kind of coming to terms with that when you were meeting with Mary Catherine? Your own anger?
Well, I think that was sort of that's what sent me there.
Okay.
It was that, because when that's there, then you're not happy.
Yeah.
And I wasn't feeling particularly happy at this. Supposedly, this should be a really happy time. So I think, when like Richard Rohr talks about our small self or our false self and then our true self, and that we're always sort of like trying to meet that true self, but we have so much as baggage, the word, or so many learned behaviors or so many experiences that prevent us from getting there. Well, I think when I just felt that the lack of happiness or joy in my life, I could only live with that for so long. And then something inside of me wanted that to change. Didn't feel right.
So what shifted for you? Was it a letting go of something or a picking up of something or?
Oh, I think it was an affirmation of my belovedness. I needed to hear that. I needed to hear that I was okay. I needed to hear that. Yeah, I needed to stop probably blaming myself for things. I mean, my personality, at that time, I thought I was an Enneagram 1 because I kind of operated out of this order in my life and this sort of like perfection, kind of things needed to be a certain way. And so that's how I thought I was. But for some reason, after experiencing spiritual direction and being able to share more deeply my story, I somehow was given permission to be a little bit more who I am and love myself who I am, because that person I was trying to be really wasn't me. I think it was the person that my childhood Barb was saying I should be. Yeah, to survive in my household growing up, I think that's what I needed to be. Yeah. So my experiences with Mary Catherine and spiritual direction helped me to see that I don't have to be that, and that's not me. And, this is who I am.
How would you, the question I'm really curious to eventually get to is, what is spirituality? Mm-hmm. So as you've described your journey, where does spirituality show up in that? Or, as you've grown, how would you define spirituality now? That's a lot of questions.
Wow. No, I think that's a really good question. What spirituality is? What is spirituality? I mean, so I did some thinking about it, but again, I'm such a feeling person and more of an intuitive person than the thinking word person. So, but what would come to me? It's just that deeper knowing. Spirituality is for me that just a deeper knowing and a realization that there is something greater in the world, in the universe, greater than me for sure. There is an energy that is flowing all the time, and it's evolving, and it's God energy. We could say God, we could say divine love, we could say, but we are in that flow. We all, and it's, so spirituality doesn't show up places. Spirituality is, and we participate in that the best we can during our lifetime, and then in another way after we die, after our bodies die, our body selves are gone. So that spirituality is that flow or that energy of love that's always inviting us to love ourselves more deeply, to be that love, to be that compassionate and presence in the world for ourselves and for others. We are part of that flow. And, so some of the things that really cracked me open into that was just, when I, probably in SDPP, the Spiritual Direction Program, working at the Spirituality Center, got my master's in servant leadership. All those things opened me up to some of the mystics, the poets, Rumi, Hafiz, Tuka, Mary Oliver. The poetry of these people, I think, opened me up even more to understanding that God is huge. I mean, God is spirituality is another way of saying God to me, but and that we look at God. We look at the world through God's eyes. We don't. I am that. I can look at you and I could say I am that. And I can look at all over the room, and so I connect in a deep way with all of creation, and see the life force there. So
was that kind of seamless getting to that point, or was there a moment where you had to let go of some things to kind of continue to move down that path?
I think I always have to keep letting go of shame and blame, and I always have to keep reminding myself of my own belovedness. And when I can do that, then I can let go of the littler things, the littler pieces that I could get hung up on. I kind of see, I see a flow, but we get snagged. It's just like with fishing, you go fishing, and if you're trolling along, you get hung up on the rocks, you get hung up on the weeds, and sometimes you can't get out. Sometimes you have to turn the boat around and go back and reel in and get out and start over again. And, I think that our journey is like that. We get snagged. And sometimes we don't know how to get off the snag because we're hooked and there's no way. So either somebody has to come and help us off, or the branch has to break, so it's just that, So was there, I think this has been sort of a slow unfolding of what I already know, as it can be for all of us. Because again, we all know. When I look at my little grandbabies when they're 2 days old, I call them God drops, because they are all knowing, just like that. And I looked at my kids. I didn't know that when I looked at my kids, because I still had a lot of my own work and growing to do. But, I wish I would have looked at them more like that, because then, I proceeded to screw them up for the next 18 years. It's like, how many ways can I break you? But we do, we do what we can do in any given moment, and we do it out of love. Marshall Rosenberg, Compassionate Communication, would say every person in any given moment, whatever they do, are doing the best that they can. And we can look at them and think, really? But in the moment, that we are all doing the best that we can in that moment. So
you seem at peace with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. This has been a delight. Thank you for coming in.
You're welcome. Thanks it's been fun to talk about myself. That's a treat. Thanks for listening, Steve. You're always such a good listener.
If you have any questions about any of the programs that they offer at the Franciscan Spirituality Center in La Crosse, Wisconsin, we invite you to call us at 608-791-5295. That's 608-791-5295. You can also visit our website at www.fscenter.org. www.fscenter.org. Thank you for listening.